Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Of course you brought store-bought pie. You never put in effort. That's what she said, standing there like a queen at the head of a very crooked court, her fork dangling between two fingers like it was too good to touch cheap aluminum. My Aunt Carol had a talent for timing, a sixth sense for when to twist the knife just as everyone's guard was down and their mouths were full. It was always subtle, just enough venom to sting, but not enough for anyone to call it out without sounding dramatic. This time, though, she miscalculated, because I had come prepared. I didn't react, not the way she expected. No red face, no muttered apology, no snarky comeback. I just smiled, big, full, like I'd been waiting for this moment. And I reached into the leather bag at my feet, the one tucked under the chair with the torn leg I always seemed to get stuck with. I pulled out a manila envelope, slid it across the table like a peace offering with a hidden blade. "You might want to take a look at this," I said, nice and quiet, just loud enough for the table to hush. She opened it with that same smirk she always wore when she thought she was in control. You know the kind, the smug curl of someone who's spent her whole life skating by on charm and fake propriety. But as her eyes moved down the invoice, something in her face cracked. Not visibly, not in a way most people would catch, but I saw it. The blink that lasted half a second too long, the hand that hovered too long over her wine glass before retreating. The document was simple, a fully itemized receipt from Jackson and Maine Catering, dated 2 days prior, billed to Carolyn Baxter, delivered to her home, confirmed received. The total? $2,968.40. Paid in full by me. She looked up, trying to regain her footing. I didn't know," she started, the words sticking like stale stuffing in her throat. But it was too late. Everyone else at the table was already leaning in. My cousin Jenny, with her influencer-perfect eyebrows and permanently arched judgment, whispered, "Wait, what?" My mother's fork froze midair. Uncle Rick blinked as if someone had just turned the lights on for the first time in years. "I took care of the food this year," I said simply, letting the words hang like smoke in the air. Figured I'd give Carol a break. Let her enjoy the holiday for once. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even angry anymore. Just done. Done with being quiet. Done with watching her take credit. Done with being the guy who showed up with the beer, the guy who scrubbed the pots afterward, the guy who was always invisible until it was time to be blamed for something forgotten or broken or late. Now, let me pause here and ask you something straight. Have you ever sat in a room full of people who claim to love you, people who share your blood, your history, and felt more like a ghost than a guest? Have you ever kept your head down, played nice, and swallowed your pride, only to have someone like Aunt Carol spit it back in your face with a smile? If you had been in my shoes, what would you have done? Because I didn't do it to embarrass her. Not really. I did it because it was the only way I could make them see. See what I did. What I always did. Every damn year. Carol tried to laugh it off, stammering something about miscommunication and surprised generosity, but no one was buying it. Jenny glanced at her phone, typing something rapidly under the table. My mom gave me that look, half pride, half fear, like she was both impressed and terrified that I'd finally stood up for myself. Uncle Rick poured himself a second whiskey and didn't say a word. But the best part? The food was incredible. Like 5-star level. Truffle mashed potatoes. Bourbon glazed ham. Apple pie with a cheddar crust that made you question every slice you'd ever had before. And the kicker? Carol had already posted photos of the spread online, bragging about another perfect Baxter Thanksgiving. Tagged it. Owned it. Took all the credit. So yeah, I could have let it slide. Could have let her keep the lie. But something inside me snapped this year. Maybe it was turning 44 and realizing no one ever said thank you. Maybe it was the memory of Sam, my ex, telling me, "You never stand up for yourself, not even with your damn aunt." Maybe it was just the fact that I was tired of pretending I didn't care. Because I did care. I always cared. And that's why I paid for the meal. That's why I kept the receipts. That's why, when she tried to shame me for a pie, I let her shame herself instead. Carol didn't touch her food after that. She poked at the sweet potatoes like they'd personally offended her. Jenny asked me if the caterers did parties, and my mom started clearing plates even though we hadn't even had dessert. And that pie? It sat in the center of the table like a forgotten prop, untouched and irrelevant. Just like her comment. Just like her power. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Because when people like Carol lose control, they don't fade, they retaliate. And something in her eyes told me that I just started something I wasn't entirely prepared to finish. But damn if I didn't enjoy that first bite of vindication. It tasted way better than pie ever could. People like Aunt Carol thrive in places where the spotlight can be stolen, where effort is measured by the volume of your voice instead of the sweat on your back, or the gas in your car, or the goddamn hours you give up on your only day off. I can't count the number of times I'd shown up early on Thanksgiving morning, still half-drained from a short work week packed into 3 frantic days, just to find Carol sitting with a mimosa in one hand, bossing someone else around. Pretending like she was single-handedly holding the family together with burnt yams and ego. And I guess I was partly to blame, because I let her. I let her hand me the grocery list scribbled on the back of an old receipt and a crumpled $20 bill with a flippant, "Get whatever's missing," knowing damn well it wouldn't cover half of it. I let her send me to pick up cousin Jenny from the airport even when I hadn't seen the girl in years, and when she finally climbed in my car, she didn't even bother to say thanks. Just asked for the Wi-Fi hotspot and turned her face to the window like I was the Uber driver she'd forgotten to tip. That was the script every year. I'd show up, I'd do what needed to be done, and then I'd vanish into the background once the turkey hit the table, like some disposable backstage crew member whose name never makes it into the credits. And every time someone complimented the food or said something about how warm and together everything felt, Carol would beam and say, "Well, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it," and no one, absolutely no one, would mention the guy who scrubbed the roaster pan until his arms ached or the guy who picked up ice from 3 different gas stations because she forgot to make a list. So when she tossed that line at me, "You never put in effort like a bone to a kicked dog," something deep in my chest turned to glass. Sharp, reflective, and ready to cut. See, this year I had decided to do everything. Not for recognition, not even out of pride. I just wanted to prove something to myself, that I could carry the weight of it all and do it better than she ever did. Quietly. Perfectly. And, yeah, maybe I wanted her to squirm a little. So 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I made the calls. I found the caterer. A local place with a reputation for understatement and excellence, exactly the kind of service Carol would have claimed as her own creation without blinking. I gave them the menu, added a few tweaks I knew everyone would love, and arranged for them to drop it all off the morning of, before I arrived. I paid in advance, full price, no discounts, no coupons, just clean, professional service, Carol's name on the delivery label, but my card on the bill. I even covered the flowers. Did you notice the arrangement in the center of the table? All burnt orange dahlias and deep burgundy roses. Elegant like something out of a magazine spread? Yeah, that was me too. I had them delivered early with a note signed from the family because I knew Carol would show them off like they were the product of her connections at the garden club. I let her have her moment. I gave her the stage. I gave her the whole damn production. And still, she couldn't help herself. She couldn't resist that little jab about the pie. Because she didn't just want credit. She wanted me small. She wanted to remind everyone, including herself, that I didn't matter unless she allowed me to. That was the game, and I'd played it for far too long. So yeah, when I handed her that catering invoice, it wasn't just about proving her wrong. It was about flipping the damn board over. Making the invisible visible. Making the audience see the cables and the scaffolding behind the show. And as soon as the document hit the table, I saw the gears start turning. My cousin Mike leaned over, squinting at the receipt, and muttered, "Wait, you paid for all the food?" His wife, A schoolteacher from Omaha who barely spoke the rest of the year, glanced around and whispered, "Then what the hell did Carol even do?" And just like that, the illusion cracked. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. Not really. I just wanted her to feel, for one damn second, what it's like to be looked through, to be dismissed, to give everything and be handed nothing but sarcasm in return. Have you ever done everything behind the scenes for someone, only to have them spit in your face like you were invisible? If you were me, would you have done the same? Because I could have let it go, sure. I could have laughed it off like I always did, could have said something vague and self-deprecating and let her shine. But you know what that gets you? A lifetime of being the background noise to someone else's solo. It gets you thankless Thursdays and a seat at the table next to the drafty window, while everyone else smiles for the family photo you end up taking. Not this year. This year, I gave them the best meal they'd ever had. I gave them a moment they'd talk about for years. And when Carol tried to knock me down, I didn't even raise my voice. I just opened a manila folder and let the truth speak for itself. And the best part? We still hadn't had dessert. The thing about being the quiet one in a family full of loudmouths and louder egos is that silence eventually becomes your armor, your mask, and your curse all at once. You learn to absorb the tension without reacting. You learn to listen while the room talks over itself. And you learn, over time, that being unproblematic often just means being unimportant in their eyes. I wasn't the golden child, not by a long shot, hell, I wasn't even the bronze. I was the guy who showed up on time, never made a scene, and kept his head down unless someone needed a ride, a favor, or a problem solved at the last second. My mother used to call me her steady Eddie, and she meant it as a compliment, but every time I heard it, it felt more like a sentence than praise. Growing up, Carol's kids were the center of everything. Jenny got ballet lessons, private tutors, and a car on her 16th birthday with a bow so big it looked like a Macy's display exploded on the driveway. Mike got sent to baseball camps and SAT prep and some elite internship in D.C., where he met a senator's nephew and ended up with a job that paid 6 figures before he hit 26. And me? I got hand-me-down textbooks, a part-time job at the gas station, and a pat on the back if I brought home B's instead of C's. It wasn't that I failed to succeed, it was that my successes didn't come with fanfare, so they didn't count in their eyes. That invisible weight followed me into adulthood, into every room and every relationship, but nowhere did it hit harder than in my marriage. Sam, my ex, was the first person to really see me, or at least I thought she did, back when we were young and hungry and dumb enough to believe love could fix the holes our families left in us. She'd been raised in a similar kind of storm, full of expectations and zero warmth, so for a while we bonded over the quiet. Dinners without drama. Holidays without shouting. Just two people trying to build something stable on the ruins of broken foundations. But then the years started to wear us down. I kept being the quiet one, the fixer, the guy who worked late, said it's fine when it wasn't, and apologized for things I didn't do just to keep the peace. And she got tired of carrying the emotional weight alone. She said she needed more than just dependability. That being invisible in your own marriage is even lonelier than being alone. The night she left, she didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She just looked at me and said, "You're so good at disappearing, Nate." I didn't realize I married a ghost. That line stuck with me more than I ever let on. So when Carol pulled her little stunt at Thanksgiving, it wasn't just about the pie or the food or the money. It was a culmination of a lifetime spent swallowing slights and shrinking into corners. And for the first time, I decided I wasn't going to be the ghost anymore. But the real blow came a few days later when I was sorting through an old file box in my closet, the kind filled with warranties and expired coupons and memories that didn't know where else to live. I was looking for a copy of my birth certificate for some paperwork, something boring and bureaucratic, and I found a letter wedged inside a manila envelope that I didn't remember ever opening. It was addressed to me from a design firm in Chicago, dated 10 years ago. A job offer. Not just any job, an art director role with a six-figure salary and relocation benefits. I sat on the edge of the bed, rereading it 3 times like the words would change if I stared long enough. But what hit harder than the letter itself was the tiny sticky note still attached, yellowed and curling at the edges, with Carol's handwriting in perfect cursive. Thought this might confuse things. Handled it. Handled it. Handled it. It felt like the wind got knocked out of me, like the weight of all the years I'd felt less than suddenly made sense in the most gut-punch way. This wasn't just about personality differences or miscommunications. This was sabotage. Quiet, cruel, calculated sabotage. Carol had intercepted my mail, my future, and made a decision on my behalf without saying a word. 10 years. 10 damn years of wondering why nothing ever quite took off. Why I always felt a few steps behind my peers, even when I worked harder, stayed later, kept my head down and my hands steady. And she'd just decided I wasn't ready. Or worse, that I didn't deserve it. I don't know how long I sat there, letter in my lap, the walls of my apartment closing in like a bad dream. I don't know if it was anger or grief or just the heavy realization that the version of me I might have been had been quietly erased by someone I was supposed to trust. I do know one thing, though this wasn't about the damn pie anymore. This was about a truth I'd buried so deep I forgot I was even carrying it. I wasn't invisible by accident. I'd been made invisible, piece by piece, until I didn't even recognize myself in the mirror. But now, finally, I did. And I was about to make damn sure everyone else saw me, too. The house had that kind of silence only families can create, tight-lipped, wide-eyed, and full of judgment pretending to be curiosity. After the pie moment and the envelope drop, nobody quite knew what to do next, like the script had suddenly gone missing and everyone was waiting to see who'd improvise first. Carol tried, of course. She always does. That woman could spin a web out of an empty wine glass and a well-timed sigh. She stood up slowly from her seat like she was about to deliver some grand toast, chin tilted, smile stretched too wide to be real, and she said, "Well, I suppose I should have thanked Nate sooner for pitching in this year." And just like that, she tried to reframe the whole damn story. Pitching in. That's what she called it. $3,000. A catered meal. A table decorated like a spread from a lifestyle blog. All of it reduced to pitching in. Like I'd dropped off an extra bag of ice or brought the napkins no one asked for. I didn't say anything at first because I didn't need to. I looked around that table and for the first time in my life, I saw the look I'd been chasing for years, recognition. People were doing the math in real time. Jenny, for once, wasn't glued to her phone. Uncle Rick had gone stiff in his chair, staring at the remains of his plate like it had betrayed him. Even Mom, who'd made a lifetime out of keeping things smooth and quiet, was shifting uncomfortably like she couldn't decide if she should defend her sister or pretend she'd never heard the name Carol in her life. It was Mike who spoke first, voice low but sharp, the kind of tone that made people lean in. "Wait, did you say Jackson and Maine?" He glanced over at the menu card Carol had placed so carefully at each seat earlier that morning, with her signature at the bottom, like she was Martha Stewart reborn. "Because I've eaten at their bistro in the city." That wasn't just catering. That was curated. And that was the opening I didn't expect, but sure as hell welcomed. "Yeah," I said, taking a slow sip of water like I was trying to stay casual and failing on purpose. Chef Martin personally selected the menu. Said he doesn't usually take private jobs, but this one came through with a glowing reference. Carol stiffened. "Well, I'm friends with his wife," she offered weakly, like that might plug the hole before the ship went under. "We met through the garden club last spring." I tilted my head, pretending to think. "That's funny." He said his wife passed 3 years ago. And just like that, the table went colder than the untouched cranberry sauce. She scrambled, fast and breathless, trying to weave a new version of the story. "Well, I meant his assistant. Or his niece. Someone from the staff, I don't remember exactly, it was all very last minute." Jenny frowned, her brows furrowing with that specific kind of influencer suspicion reserved for brand partnerships gone bad. So wait, she said slowly, like the thought had to work its way through layers of curated nonsense. You didn't cook any of this? Carol looked ready to explode or faint. Honestly, it could have gone either way. Of course I did, she insisted. Some of it. I coordinated. I finalized the menu. I chose the dishes. Mike leaned forward, voice dry as ash. Did you also pick the font for the invoice? Now, I could have twisted the knife right then and there. I could have pulled out the second document in my bag, an actual contract, signed, notarized, and delivered with her name printed clearly under the header, client, but I didn't. Instead, I let her sweat in the warmth of her unraveling authority, because sometimes silence is the cruelest sound in the room. Let her hang herself with her own words, the same way she'd looped a noose around my self-worth for years and smiled while doing it. That's when Jenny's phone buzzed. One short vibration, followed by another, and then the color drained from her face like a plug had been pulled. What the hell? She muttered, fingers moving fast. Why are people tagging me in this? We all turned as she shoved the screen in Carol's direction, her voice rising now, louder than we'd ever heard it. Is this you? Is this your account? Carol blinked, squinting. What account? Jenny's voice cracked as she read aloud. Family is just a mirror of your bad decisions. No amount of filters can hide emptiness. Are you kidding me? You posted this crap about me. And then the bomb dropped. It's a burner, Jenny snapped. But someone traced the IP. This was posted from your house, Carol. From your Wi-Fi. Why would you? Why the hell would you sabotage me? The room imploded in slow motion. And Carol's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find a lie that would pass through her teeth without shattering. But the evidence was too sharp, too real, too recent. No way to spin it. No niece from a garden club to blame. No wine buzz to soften the blow. Rick stood up. Just stood. Didn't say a word. He walked to the sink, poured his drink down the drain, and left the room without a single look back. That silence? It wasn't just cold. It was condemning. I didn't have to say anything else. The truth had done my work for me. But deep down, I knew this was just the start. Because people like Carol don't fall quietly. They grab and claw and tear as they go down, desperate to pull anyone down with them. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the fall. I was just curious how far she'd go before she hit bottom. It didn't take long for the whispers to start circling the room like flies around a wound, low and sharp and mean with that edge of paranoia people always find when their image starts to crack. The food had gone cold, forgotten and untouched, plates still full while everyone sat stiff in their chairs, like we were all part of some low-budget courtroom drama staged in the middle of a perfectly set Thanksgiving table. And suddenly, I wasn't just the guy who dropped the truth bomb, I was the guy on trial for everything that had followed. I mean, Mike started, voice too casual to be sincere. Nate was the one who brought the receipts, right? He's obviously been planning something for a while. The word planning hit like an accusation, not a compliment. He leaned back in his chair like a detective ready to corner his suspect, and I could feel the attention shift toward me again, like the spotlight had never really moved off my shoulders in the first place. I didn't flinch. I've been accused before of being too quiet, too detached, too passive, too accommodating. This was just another flavor of blame, just another way for the family to reorient their discomfort without doing the harder work of asking why it existed in the first place. Carol hadn't said a word since the burner account revelation, her mouth locked in a frown that looked more like a mask than an expression. But her eyes, those eyes were darting, watching, calculating behind the thick fog of her shame. She wasn't done. Not yet. I didn't leak anything, I said calmly, meeting every gaze around the table with steady focus, my voice controlled but cutting. I didn't create a fake account. I didn't take screenshots. I didn't trace IPs. I don't even follow Jenny's brand page, let alone sabotage it. Jenny, arms crossed and visibly shaken, looked like she wanted to believe me, but wasn't sure if she should. That's how trust works in this family. It's a sliding scale based on who's embarrassed and who's pretending not to be. Then who did? She asked, her voice smaller than usual, stripped of its usual influencer gloss and PR-trained polish. That's the question, isn't it? I replied, not with smugness, but with the slow-burning exhaustion of someone who's been scapegoated for years and finally reached the end of his damn rope. But Mike wasn't letting up. You had motive, he said, trying to sound objective, like this was some logical breakdown instead of a family-feeding frenzy. You were clearly pissed. You set Carol up with the catering thing, so what's one more strike while she's down? And that's when I laughed. Quiet, sharp, and bitter like biting into lemon rind. Set her up? I repeated, not bothering to hide the contempt anymore. I paid for the food she lied about. I did her job for her, and then I got insulted for not putting in effort. You call that a setup? Silence again. Thicker this time, weighted with guilt and the discomfort of truth. No one wanted to be the next to speak because that would mean picking a side, and sides in this family have never been chosen lightly. Their alliances, long-term investments, and declarations of war. And just when I thought I'd have to start listing everyone's sins one by one just to break the deadlock, Uncle Rick cleared his throat. The sound was like a thunderclap in a dead room, sharp, sudden, and impossible to ignore. He'd been silent all evening, brooding at the edge of the chaos like some forgotten relic of another era, always present but never involved. She's been doing this for years, he said, voice low but solid, like gravel sliding across concrete. Every head turned toward him like we'd all forgotten he could talk. But you kids didn't see it. I did. And I'm done. Carol's face went sheet white, like the blood had drained out of her with just those few words. Rick didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her. He just stared straight ahead, like he was finally reading a script he'd kept hidden in his jacket pocket for decades. All those holidays, he continued, all those stories she twisted, all the people she stepped on. She needed to be the center. Every damn year. And I let her. I stood there, holding her coat while she set the fire and smiled for the photos. Why didn't you say anything? Jenny asked, her voice brittle, like a glass about to snap. Because I didn't think any of you cared, Rick said simply. And maybe I was right because none of you saw it, not until someone finally held up a mirror. The air felt electric then, charged with the hum of unraveling loyalties and raw, unfiltered shame. Carol tried to speak, but no words came out. Her lips moved, her eyes burned, but nothing formed that could undo what Rick had just confirmed. I didn't have to defend myself anymore. Rick had done it for me without taking a single side. He'd drawn a line no one could erase. And in that moment, I realized something unexpected. This wasn't just about Carol. This wasn't just about the burner account or the food or the years of thankless work. This was about a system we'd all kept alive by staying silent. And that system had finally started to crack. The real question now was what would happen when it finally broke. The house was smaller than I remembered, though maybe it only looked that way because I'd spent so many years imagining it from a child's height, through the warped lens of memory, grief, and resentment. The white paint on the porch was peeling at the edges, curling like dead skin under the weight of too many forgotten summers. There was a wind chime hanging near the door that hadn't been there before, and it made this dull metallic clatter every time I knocked, like it wasn't used to being disturbed. I stood there with my hand still half raised after the third knock, unsure if I wanted him to answer, unsure what I'd even come for exactly, maybe closure, maybe confrontation. Or maybe just one more piece of the puzzle that I couldn't solve back at the Thanksgiving table. When Frank finally opened the door, he looked older than I expected, but not in a broken-down way, more like time had etched itself into his face deliberately, as if every line had been drawn with purpose. His hair was mostly gray now, his beard a little overgrown, and his shirt had a stain on the collar that said he didn't expect company and didn't much care if it came. He stared at me for a moment, didn't say anything, didn't invite me in, Just stood there with that same impassive look I remembered from every soccer game he left early, every graduation he sent a check to instead of showing up. "You gonna stand there all day?" he finally asked, his voice dry as dust but not unkind. Just blunt. Just him. "I didn't know if I should come," I said, which was probably the first honest thing I'd told him in 2 decades. He stepped aside without answering, just waved me in with a flick of his hand. The inside of the house smelled like dust and engine oil, like someone who lived alone and had made peace with that reality a long time ago. There were magazines stacked on the coffee table, a half-finished crossword puzzle, and a muted TV playing a rerun of some forgotten Western in the background. It was quiet, but not empty, lived in but untouched in the way only a stubborn man's home can be. We sat across from each other like 2 reluctant negotiators in a hostage situation neither of us fully understood. I didn't know how to start, so I went with what brought me there. "Carol said some things," I said slowly, watching for a reaction. "And some other things came to light. About how she's been controlling the narrative for a long time." Frank didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He just stared at the floor, then at me, then leaned back in his chair like the weight of what I said hadn't surprised him one bit. "She always did," he muttered. "That's her game. Control the story, control the people. She's been doing that since we were kids." I felt my chest tighten, not from anger this time, but from something colder, recognition. It was like he'd spoken a code I hadn't known I'd been raised with. A language of manipulation and silence that suddenly explained everything I hadn't been able to make sense of for years. "She told Mom you walked out on us," I said. "Said you couldn't handle the responsibility." Frank laughed, bitter and short. "Of course she did," he said. "And I let her. That's on me." I looked at him hard then, waiting for him to crack, to confess, to give me the big dramatic moment I'd always imagined. But it didn't come like that. It came quieter, slower. "I never left because of you," he said after a long pause. "I left because of her. And your mother. And what they became when they were together." "What do you mean?" He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Carol had your mother wrapped around her finger. Always did. Linda was the sweet one, but she had no spine. Carol made the rules, and your mom just nodded along. When I started pushing back, things got ugly. Carol spun everything. Turned every disagreement into abuse. Every argument into evidence. She wanted me out of the picture. I made too much noise. But why not come back? Why not explain?" I asked, and I hated how my voice cracked when I said it, hated that part of me still wanted the excuse, still craved the story that made him not the villain. "I tried," he said, and there was something hard in his voice now, something bitter that had calcified over the years. "I sent letters. I called. Hell, I even showed up once, but Carol intercepted me at the door. Said you'd moved on. Said you didn't need me." "That never happened," I said, barely above a whisper. "No," he said. "But you believed it. And that's all it took." I didn't know what to say to that because he was right. I had believed it. I'd built a whole life on the idea that my father had abandoned me, and in doing so, I'd let Carol write the entire script. And then, as if he'd known it was coming, Frank reached over to the side table and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age, sealed but scuffed at the corners like it had been opened and closed too many times. "You should have gotten this when you were 22, he said, handing it to me. I took it with both hands, my heart thudding like a slow drumbeat in my chest. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just leaned back and said, "Read it when you're ready." And with that, the room felt smaller than ever before, not from walls or ceilings, but from the weight of everything I hadn't known until now, truths that had been kept from me, stories that had been rewritten. And the gut-wrenching realization that the person I thought had disappeared had been trying to be seen all along. And now I had the letter. And now I had a choice. I opened the envelope slowly, careful not to rip the brittle paper that had clearly been sealed and resealed more than once, as though someone had toyed with the idea of telling the truth but lacked the courage to follow through. The letter inside was thin but heavy with meaning, folded crisply into thirds, the kind of fold you only get when someone intends for something to feel official, like it should be presented at a desk, across from a handshake. Not hidden in the drawer of a father who had been written off for most of my adult life. My fingers hesitated on the crease before I finally unfolded it, bracing myself for another disappointment, another dead end in a family history littered with manipulation, omission, and rewritten facts dressed up as memories. It was my grandfather's will, his original one, the kind drafted before Carol decided to step in and organize the estate after his death, before she told everyone there wasn't much left, just a few trinkets and an old savings account she'd already handled. But this wasn't a trinket. This was a document drafted in clean, black ink, witnessed, notarized, and signed 2 years before he passed. And right there on the second page, clear as day, was a line that cracked something deep inside me with a soundless shatter. To my grandson Nathaniel James Baxter, I leave the house on River Road, the surrounding land, and its contents in full and unconditional ownership, as thanks for his quiet strength and unwavering loyalty to this family. I read it 3 times, and still it didn't feel real. My name, my full name. Not the family, not to be shared equally among, not to be divided at Carol's discretion. No, it was for me. Just me. And I never got it. I never even knew it existed. Carol had taken it, taken my inheritance, taken my right to know that my grandfather had seen me, had valued me, had trusted me with something that mattered. She'd locked that truth away like it was dangerous. And maybe to her it was. Because that will didn't just name me, it erased the illusion she'd built, the myth that she was the heir, the caretaker, the rightful keeper of everything we came from. It proved that someone else in the family had seen through her long before I did and decided that I was the one worth giving something real to. And she couldn't let that stand. The betrayal didn't hit like a slap or a scream. It hit slow and steady, like water filling your lungs. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, holding that letter, staring out the dusty window of my father's house while the truth rewired the entire story I'd been told about who I was and what I mattered to this family. The house on River Road was more than just property. It was the place where my grandfather taught me how to fix a leaky faucet, where he showed me how to patch drywall, where I spent endless summers mowing the lawn and repairing old furniture with him in the garage. It was the only place I'd ever felt fully seen as a kid, not because of what I said or did, but because he'd just sit beside me in silence and treat me like I belonged. And Carol had stolen that from me, not just the house, but the knowledge that I had mattered to someone, that I had been chosen. It wasn't anger that rose in me as I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. It was clarity. Sharp, unflinching clarity that burned away every ounce of hesitation I'd carried since the moment I handed her that catering invoice across the Thanksgiving table. She hadn't just disrespected me this year, she'd been doing it for decades, and now I had proof. Not just proof of her manipulation, but proof that I wasn't the version of me she tried so hard to project. I wasn't the disposable relative, the backup character in her spotlight story. I was the one who'd earned something real, and she'd buried it so she could keep playing Queen of the Ashes. So I did something I'd never done before. I made a call to a lawyer. Not out of vengeance. Not even out of spite. I did it because I deserved to know what could be done. I deserved to stand in that house and decide for myself what it meant to me. I deserved to be the one to close the door or open it, not just be locked out without even knowing a key existed. The lawyer, Samantha Patel, a sharp and no-nonsense estate attorney I found through a recommendation from a friend, agreed to meet me the following day. She looked over the document, verified the signatures, and within 30 minutes had confirmed everything I needed to know. The revised will Carol filed? It was submitted weeks after my grandfather's death, with no original available and only a typed copy bearing a suspiciously convenient signature. And the original I held? It was ironclad, provided we could establish a chain of custody and prove that it hadn't been willfully destroyed or altered by anyone else. This isn't just a legal matter, she said, tapping the letter with a pen. This is a fraud case, if you want to go that route. I don't, I said. Not yet. Because as much as I wanted to see Carol squirm under a deposition light, this wasn't about destroying her anymore. This was about reclaiming what had been taken from me and doing it on my terms. So when Leftovers Day rolled around, the Saturday tradition where everyone shows up again in stretchy pants, pretending Thursday hadn't been a slow-motion explosion, I showed up too. But this time, I wasn't holding a pie or a grocery bag or a folded chair. I walked in with Samantha beside me, dressed professionally and carrying a folder thick with documentation. The room fell silent the moment we crossed the threshold, conversations freezing mid-word as eyes darted between me and the woman at my side. Carol stood near the sink, a wine glass in her hand, trying to look casual. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon," she said, that same smile stitched across her face like a badly sewn wound. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied evenly. "Just figured it was time we cleared a few things up." Then Samantha set the folder on the kitchen table. And I set my gaze on Carol. Because the past was no longer a question I was afraid to ask. Now it was an answer I intended to give. It's strange how quiet a house can get when everyone's pretending to be normal, like if they speak too loudly, they might shatter the illusion they've worked so hard to plaster over the ruins of the last disaster. The air inside Carol's home that Saturday felt like the kind of tension you only get when people are sitting on top of secrets and trying to balance them like wine glasses on a crooked table. No one was laughing. No one was talking about football or traffic or sales at Target. No one even touched the deviled eggs. Samantha, my lawyer, had placed the folder in the middle of the table and left shortly after. She hadn't needed to stay long. The documents were clear, the signatures undeniable, the timeline damning. I didn't push it. I didn't demand an apology. I just said, "Take a look. Let me know if anything seems off." And then I stepped outside onto the porch, letting the cold air cut through the heat of my pulse until it slowed to something manageable. I didn't want to explode. That wasn't the point of any of this. The point wasn't vengeance or even justice, not really. It was visibility. It was truth laid bare like the bones of a picked clean bird carcass, out in the open where everyone could finally see it for what it was. Inside, I heard the shuffle of chairs and papers, the low hum of hushed voices asking each other what this meant, how long it had been going on, what else Carol had lied about. But no one said my name. No one asked me why I hadn't brought it up sooner, why I hadn't fought louder, faster, meaner. Because by now, they all knew the answer to that. I had always been quiet not because I was weak, but because I had been taught that making noise meant starting fights I could never win. But that's the trick, isn't it? Once you stop trying to win, once you stop giving a damn about their scoreboard, you suddenly become free in a way they'll never understand. When I walked back into the house, Carol was still at the head of the table, glass in hand, mouth shut, eyes red but dry. She wasn't going to cry in front of them. Not her. She was going to pretend, even now, that this was just a misunderstanding. That it would all blow over. That she'd bounce back the way she always had, reinvent herself, recenter herself, crawl back to the middle of every conversation like she was owed the space. But not today. Today, I decided to give a toast. I tapped a spoon gently against my water glass and raised it high. It took a second, but they all turned to me. Some wary, some expectant, a few just exhausted. I waited a beat longer than I had to, let the silence settle. "Before I go," I said calmly, "I just want to say thank you." That caught a few of them off guard. Carol blinked, confused, and Jenny shifted in her seat like she thought this might be the start of some redemption arc. "I want to thank Carol," I continued, keeping my voice steady, the words measured like cold whiskey poured over ice. "For teaching me the true meaning of effort." A few heads tilted. No one interrupted. They were learning. "Because for years," I said, "I thought effort meant being quiet. Showing up, picking up the slack, doing what's asked and never complaining. I thought it meant being helpful, invisible, dependable. But now I see it means something else entirely. It means standing up, even when it's uncomfortable. It means digging through the lies and finding your name buried beneath them. It means fighting for what should have been yours all along, even if it makes people look at you different. I glanced around the table, my eyes meeting each of theirs for just a second longer than necessary. Some of you think I went too far. Some of you think I didn't go far enough. And maybe you're both right. But I didn't do any of this to win. I didn't do it to embarrass anyone or blow up the family. I did it so you'd finally see me. And then I smiled, not wide, not smug, just a calm, tired smile that came from finally breathing after a decade of holding it in. And now you do. I set the glass down, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, and headed for the door. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. There was too much history in the air now, too much wreckage under the floorboards, and too many truths echoing off the walls to pretend like things could go back to the way they were. But just before I stepped outside, I turned back toward the table, looked directly at Carol, still gripping that glass like it might save her from drowning, and said one last thing. "Oh," I added casually, "and just so you know, I never even liked pie." And with that, I walked out of the house and into the cold November air, the wind biting at my face, but feeling more refreshing than punishing. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because I'd finally taken the last bite. And this time, it tasted like freedom.